Hey, what's going on, you guys? It's Aces High, and we just finished up Epic History TV's part 1 through 6 on the Napoleonic Wars, after the whole French Revolution and everything. And I'm really excited to just learn more about Napoleon. I'm really digging this. You guys, all my viewers, are answering so many questions. Um, for those of you that don't know, I do get permission to use all the videos. I asked Epic History TV, and they told me I can use it as long as I don't use the screen full screen. So I bumped it down a little bit. I think it still looks really good, and I hope you appreciate it. Also, if you guys haven't subscribed, make sure you hit that sub button and ring the bell, because I post videos every single day, and trust me, they're in order, so you don't want to miss them. That being said, now we're moving on to Napoleon's Vietnam, another Epic History TV video, and basically it talks about Spain from 1809 to 1811. I'm really excited for this one. This one is going to be a little bit longer than my other videos because the video by itself is 20 minutes, and usually with reactions and start and finish and all that, it's about an extra 5 minutes. So bear with me. This one's going to be about 25 minutes, but I think it will well be worth it. Anyway, I'll shut up. Let's get started.
In 1809, Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, was at the height of his power. He had just won another crushing victory against Austria at Wagram, and imposed a humiliating peace treaty. But the war he'd started in Spain and Portugal, with his ill-judged invasion the previous year, continued to rage. Napoleon had placed his own brother Joseph on the Spanish throne, uniting a proud country against him. His troops had dealt ruthlessly with popular uprisings, while routing a succession of Spanish armies. In February 1809, Marshal Lannes overcame the heroic defence of Zaragoza in a brutal siege that cost 54,000 Spanish lives and 10,000 French. But
I'm from Tacoma, Washington, in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S. Anyway, it's a city just outside of Seattle, and our total population is 210,000 or so. That's about 25% of this city, and this is, it's a decent-sized city. That's incredible. 50,000 men lost? Oh my God.
Still, the Spanish and Portuguese remained defiant. And 3 months after their escape from Coruña, the British were back. In April, Sir Arthur Wellesley landed in Lisbon to lead a small Anglo-Portuguese army. British redcoats would fight alongside Portuguese troops, who, with the help of British training, would soon prove themselves highly effective. 3 weeks after arriving in Portugal, Wellesley moved against Marshal Soult's Second Corps, which had recently taken Porto. Soult and his troops, preoccupied with plundering the region, had no warning of the British advance, and were soon in headlong retreat, back through the mountains into Spain.
Seems like a tough fight.
Having secured Portugal for the time being, Wellesley planned a joint campaign with General Cuesta, commanding the Spanish army of Extremadura. On the 10th of July, the two commanders met at Casas de Miravete to discuss strategy. Relations between these two allies were not straightforward. Spain and Britain had a long history of conflict. The Spanish were deeply suspicious of British intentions in Spain.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I know that France and Britain have had a lot of conflict for a very long time. Many years. But Spain, like you just said, Spain and Britain weren't exactly great either, right? Am I wrong in saying that they had less conflict than France and Britain, or were they even on worse terms with Britain? Let me know, because I'm thinking France was definitely on worse terms, and not necessarily because of Napoleon, but even before that.
While the British had a low opinion of the Spanish army, which they considered poorly trained and badly led. Wellesley's request to take over command of Spanish forces was rejected, but the generals agreed to a joint advance up the Tagus Valley towards Madrid, to be supported by General Venegas advancing from La Mancha. In the face of their advance, Marshal Victor's First Corps withdrew to Talavera, where he was joined by King Joseph and General Sebastiani's Fourth Corps.
They're
The
getting
French
very
plan
close to
was
Madrid.
for Joseph's army to defend Madrid, while Marshal Soult led 3 corps down from the north to get behind and trap the Anglo-Spanish forces.
Okay.
But Joseph, worried by Soult's slow progress and General Venegas's advance on Madrid, decided to attack at Talavera. This video is brought to you by our sponsor, Curiosity Stream, with it watched all our long docs on hidden traces. The Battle of Talavera saw British infantry bear the brunt of the French assault. They stood firm and repelled the enemy with disciplined musket fire and bayonet charges. Talavera was a small battle compared to the great clashes fought that year in Austria, but
Really?
it proved that under Wellesley, Britain's small, well-drilled army was a force to be reckoned with,
Wow.
even though in the short term, victory achieved little.
Yeah, but one thing I have to ask too is we all know that Napoleon was he was a genius when it came to strategy, and he was just a great strategist. How was Joseph? Was he as great of a leader, or was he even close, or was he just kind of a crappy leader? Let me know. I'm sure you guys know all about him.
Warned of Soult's approach from captured dispatches, the victorious Anglo-Spanish army retreated,
Okay.
while King Joseph and Fourth Corps marched against Venegas's army, which they smashed at the Battle of Almonacid. That autumn, the Supreme Junta in Seville, Free Spain's effective government, raised 2 new armies for another attempt to liberate Madrid,
Wow.
planning to converge on the capital from north and south. But Wellesley, ennobled as Viscount Wellington for his victory at Talavera, had been so disgusted by the lack of Spanish cooperation that summer that he refused to risk his army. Predictably, Spain's inexperienced armies met with disaster. At Ocaña, they suffered their biggest defeat of the war, when a smaller force under Marshal Soult routed the Spanish army, taking 14,000 prisoners and 50 cannon.
I know that he's not happy with the lack of Spanish cooperation, but I mean, it just seems a little selfish to not help out, because if they take Spain, they're that much closer to having, they're having that much more land. It's going to be that much harder to take down Napoleon's army, But if you can stop them in Spain, then you don't have to fight them in Great Britain later. I think that's a stupid move for him not to help out, honestly.
A week later, the army of the left was heavily defeated at Alba de Tormes. There was more bad news when Girona fell to the French after an epic 7-month siege. The Supreme Junta's plans to retake Madrid were in tatters, and southern Spain was now wide open to French attack. In January 1810, King Joseph marched south with an army of 60,000 men. Spanish resistance evaporated. Spain's Supreme Junta was overthrown in a coup, as Córdoba and Seville fell without a fight.
Wow.
Joseph, who still hoped to win over the Spanish with his progressive reforms, was welcomed by many as a savior from anarchy.
It makes sense that he's trying to win him over, because if you're going to continue to be in charge there, set in that place, it's not like you're just taking and then moving on, putting somebody else in charge. If you're the person that's going to be sitting on the throne in Madrid, you want the people to like you. Otherwise, you might end up with a coup and your head cut off, or you might end up in front of the firing squad,
Only Cadiz held out, its defences reinforced by a British naval squadron, and was besieged by Victor's First Corps. Meanwhile, Napoleon sent Marshal Massena to Spain with 65,000 reinforcements. He was reckoned one of Napoleon's best marshals, and had just been made Prince of Essling for his heroics in the recent war against Austria. Massena
that's a name I don't remember, and I've been trying to remember all the marshals. I don't recognize that one.
was to lead a third French invasion of Portugal, take Lisbon and chase the British back into the sea.
Okay.
He laid siege to Ciudad Rodrigo, a fortified city controlling one of the main routes into Portugal, which surrendered after 2 weeks' bombardment. Wellington, with only 33,000 men to face Massena's 50,000, retreated. Massena crossed the Portuguese frontier and besieged Almeida. After just 13 hours of bombardment, a lucky French shot hit the Portuguese magazine. 70 tons of gunpowder went up in a devastating explosion that made all further resistance useless.
13 hours and that happened?
It was a serious blow to Wellington, who'd been relying on Almeida's strong defences to buy him time. At Busaco, he found a strong defensive position and made a stand. Massena's uphill frontal attack failed, at a cost of 4,000 casualties. But the next day, the French found a way to outflank Wellington's position, and his retreat continued. As Massena's army neared Lisbon, his scouts reported something completely unexpected. Stretching across the Lisbon Peninsula, protecting the city from attack, they found a new chain of fortifications in 2 major lines. Known as the Lines of Torres Vedras, the British and Portuguese had been constructing these defences for more than a year. Now the lines bristled with more than 100 forts, redoubts and batteries, manned by 30,000 troops and 250 guns. Massena.
That's actually really interesting, because, I mean, if you could just even keep this last little part of Portugal, even if everything else is taken, that's a spot where the British can land their ships. It's a spot where you can regroup and you can hold, and it's kind of a last-ditch effort. Wow, I like it.
Soon discovered the lines were far too strong for him to attack. What's more, a scorched earth strategy had stripped the surrounding countryside of anything that might help the French. While Portuguese partisans attacked French supply columns as they struggled through the mountains to reach Massena's army. Massena faced a grim predicament. Starved of supplies, too weak to attack, unwilling to retreat. But throughout this standoff, it was Portuguese peasants who suffered most of all. When their villages and farms were burned, many took refuge in Lisbon, where thousands died of starvation and disease.
Wow. It's always the poor that take the hardest stuff, you know? It's unfortunate.
Back in France, Napoleon had been preoccupied with his divorce from the Empress Josephine, and then a new marriage to Archduchess Marie-Louise, daughter of the Emperor of Austria.
Was divorce really common in France at the time? I know in many countries it was basically unheard of, especially if they're heavy in the church, but I know he kind of steered away from the whole Catholic Church. Yeah, was divorce common in France at the time, or was it unheard of, or was it just not so common, uncommon? Let me know.
She was now expecting their first child. Nevertheless, from Paris, Napoleon sent frequent orders to his marshals in Spain and Portugal, urging them to take more aggressive action. But when these orders arrived weeks later, they were usually out of date and showed little understanding of the problems his marshals faced. He now ordered Soult, based in Andalusia, to go on the offensive to draw enemy forces away from Lisbon, so Massena could take the city. Soult laid siege to Badajoz, a fortified city that controlled the southern route into Portugal. When 12,000 men of the army of Extremadura marched to its relief, they were routed by Soult, after which the city tamely surrendered, giving up
I believe it.
8,000 prisoners and vast quantities of stores. It was another heavy blow to Spain's armed forces. But remarkably, despite such disasters and their many blundering generals, the Spanish troops remained willing to fight, the courage of the rank and file undimmed. Victor's First Corps, besieging Cadiz, had now been so weakened to support other operations that the Anglo-Spanish garrison decided to attack. The Allies landed along the coast to strike at the French siege lines from the rear. But they were ambushed by the French at Barossa. Despite heavy losses, the Anglo-Portuguese rearguard fought off the enemy, but a furious falling out between British commander Sir Thomas Graham and his Spanish counterpart General La Peña threw away any advantage. Soult, alarmed at these developments, marched back to Andalusia. Meanwhile, Massena, out of food and with no prospect of reinforcement, had no option but to retreat. Wellington's army pursued, discovering evidence of several appalling atrocities committed by the French against Portuguese villagers.
Wow.
There were running battles with the French rear.
I thought the French didn't do too many things like that. I thought, I don't know, they were well paid, things like that, so they just didn't treat the villages too bad. I mean, they burnt them down or whatever, you know, if need be. But I don't know. It's just I didn't expect much, just atrocities, I guess, from the French army, you know.
Rearguard, brilliantly commanded by Marshal Ney, until he was sacked by Massena for criticizing his leadership. Having chased the French out of Portugal, Wellington besieged Almeida. Massena's army, now rested and reinforced, marched to its aid. The two armies clashed again at Fuentes de Oñoro. In 2 days of heavy fighting, Massena failed to break through Wellington's position to relieve Almeida. The fortress fell the next week, but to Wellington's fury, British bungling allowed most of the French garrison to escape. Massena had lost 25,000 men in Portugal. Now he'd lost Almeida too, and a string of bad decisions, not least to bring his mistress with him on campaign, had cost him the respect of his officers. The Marshal, whom Napoleon had once nicknamed...
I don't know if it's, why would you do that? Why would you bring your mistress on the campaign? Is that really that common? It kind of seems like you don't care as much, and I don't know how it was with land armies, but oftentimes if you bring, a lot of people are superstitious. They would say if you bring a woman onto the battlefield, onto a boat back in the day, it will cause storms and all this different things like that, and surely the boat will be taken by the sea and stuff like that. And I mean, obviously that's all BS, but if people are so superstitious, there's got to be stories like that about bringing women into the battlefield as well, you know?
Nicknamed the Dear Child of Victory, was recalled to France in disgrace, never to hold senior command again.
Wow.
Napoleon sent Marshal Marmont to replace him. Meanwhile, Marshal Beresford, the British commander of Portugal's army, was sent to retake Badajoz with 20,000 British and Portuguese troops. When Soult approached with a relief force, Beresford marched to meet him at Albuera. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the war. Around 6,000 casualties on each side, with more than a third of the British infantry killed, wounded or captured. Marshal Soult declared,
"There is no beating these troops, in spite of their generals. I always thought they were bad soldiers. Now I'm sure of it. I had turned their right, pierced their center, and everywhere victory was mine. But they didn't know how to run."
I love these videos, but maybe I just haven't heard enough French, but that just sounds like not the best French accent.
Soult had been checked, But he was determined to save Badajoz. The newly arrived Marshal Marmont marched to his aid, and they advanced again. This combined army forced the British to abandon the siege. But when Wellington withdrew to a strong defensive position across the Portuguese border, Soult and Marmont did not pursue. French commanders in Spain had learned grudging respect for Wellington and for the steadiness of his troops. For now, the war in Spain had entered stalemate.
Okay. They took most of Spain, though. It's just Portugal and the southeast of Spain, I guess.
While British, French and Spanish armies crisscrossed Spain and Portugal, another war was fought every day in the mountains, hills and woods. From 1808, Spanish and Portuguese civilians, militias and ex-soldiers began taking up arms against the hated French invader.
Okay,
They
rebelling.
waged a war of ambushes and hit-and-run raids, known in Spanish as La Guerrilla, the Little War.
Is that where the term guerrilla warfare came from? Oh my god, I paused at the wrong time. They're probably just about to tell me. If they don't tell me, let me know in the comments if that's where guerrilla warfare came from. That's super interesting. That makes total sense.
Fighters became known in English as guerrillas.
There it is.
Britain's Royal Navy supplied vital
Wow.
weapons, stores and money, often landing them behind enemy lines. Much of Spain's rugged countryside fell under the control of the guerrillas. North of Madrid, Juan Martín Díez, an ex-soldier known as El Empecinado, the Stubborn, led a guerrilla band 6,000 strong.
Wow.
In Navarre, Esposimina, a former peasant, ran a highly organized band that caused havoc for the French, capturing convoys and couriers on the strategic Burgos-Bayonne road, and branding Viva Mina on the forehead of collaborators. While in the west, Julian Sanchez, known as El Charro, led the self-styled Lanceros de Castilla. El Charro himself wore a French hussar's cap, its eagle symbolically turned upside down. There were dozens more bands operating across Spain, though a few were no better than bandits, terrorizing civilians as often as the enemy.
Okay.
The guerrilla war was merciless, marked by hideous atrocities on both sides. A French soldier's greatest fear was to be taken alive by the guerrillas, who often tortured their prisoners before killing them. Tens of thousands of French troops were tied down by this people's war, guarding outposts or patrolling the countryside. The roads were so dangerous for French messengers that they required cavalry escorts of 200 men or more. Many still didn't get through, their valuable dispatches forwarded to Wellington, for whom they became an invaluable source of intelligence. The war in Spain would ultimately cost the lives of 240,000 French soldiers. As was typical in wars of this era, most died from disease,
Wow.
but more died fighting guerrillas than in battle against the British and Spanish armies. However, it was the twin threat, a well-led regular army under Wellington and a popular insurgency, that left the French facing an impossible strategic dilemma. If their armies remained dispersed to fight the guerrillas, Wellington could attack. But if they concentrated to defeat Wellington in battle,
The
huge
guerrillas.
swathes of the country would quickly fall to the guerrillas. This was Napoleon's Vietnam, or his
Yeah, I believe it.
bleeding ulcer, as he called it. A war that cost his empire an average of 100 casualties every day, with little prospect of victory. And in 1812, as Napoleon launched his gigantic invasion of Russia, Wellington and the guerrillas launched their own offensive that would turn the war in Spain on its head.
Wow. All right, you guys, let's have a talk about that. I mean, what do you think? It it almost seems like Napoleon's pushing on. He's pushing too much. He's fighting on two fronts, and that's just really tough. Not to mention, a big part of it is his enemies are actually learning how to fight him. And then the guerrilla warfare on top of all that just really doesn't help. It's a tough situation, and I don't know that he can hold Spain. I mean, we'll find out for sure. Let alone push into Russia. I think he needs, before he pushed into Russia, I think he should have diverted more troops into Spain to completely take Spain and Portugal. Um, but I mean, I'm no military general. I'm no strategist, so who knows? Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. If you haven't subbed, hit that sub and ring the bell because I do pop videos. Post them every day. Till next time, I love y'all. This is Aces High, and I'm out.